Yes, indeed, and may he rest in peace. So here's our phone number, 1-800-585-9396. Do you have a question about the Catholic faith? Is there something about Catholics that you find very attractive, but you're thinking, golly, that's not what Mom and Dad said Catholics were like, or that's not what they told me in the third grade. Catholics do this, do this, do this. Maybe we can set you straight. You may be laboring perception about something or other along the way.
And Tom, one thing that occurs to me, oddly, I had a whole lot of questions this week about the Supreme Court's decision on Friday regarding the meaning of marriage. And for many people, they believe that the Catholic Church is on the wrong side of history in this topic. Of course, we know that's not the case, and we'd love to talk about that too. If you have a question about why is the Church the most vocal opponent of the move that the Supreme Court is making with regard to marriage.
Absolutely, and we've certainly had discussions, you and I, and everybody here at the network about this. We've dedicated programs to it. We've got another one coming up this week on Register Radio. I believe Jeanette DeMello is going to be interviewing Archbishop Laurie. He'll certainly have quite a bit to say about all this. But if this is one of those instances where the Church stands fast with the teaching in the Bible. This is one man and one woman,
and the deliberations of human reason.
Yeah.
So, Scripture's on our side, but reason is on our side as well, because nature is on our side.
Nature is on our side, and I think I think anybody can look at that and revert to nature and say, oh yeah, well that's where babies come from.
Exactly.
Give us a call if you have a question about that or anything else having to do with the Catholic faith. 1-800-585-9396. 1-800-585-9396. I want to get to an email here from South Africa, from Lesotho, Southern Africa. This is from Raymond, and he says, regarding purgatory, I usually challenge people by asking where our human weaknesses like envy and anger disappear to when we die, after asking them if they believe they currently have them and if they will have them in heaven. This usually demonstrates the necessity for purgatory, but a tough answer I received today is they belong to the flesh. When my soul separates with the flesh, it is freed from them, and death frees us from other experiences which trigger this weakness in this life. How would you respond to that, and what exactly are effects of sin?
Oh, what a great question. I really appreciate it. Okay,
yeah.
So this is from Raymond in South Africa. Put your finger on something really important, I think, and this was an I had on the way into the church when I was still Protestant, and it was this, that all Christians agree that between the moment of physical death and our arrival in glory, all right, that we will in fact have actual sin removed from us, that we're not going to arrive in the presence of God as actively sinful. We're going to be purged somehow, right? A major difference between Protestants and Catholics is that Catholics say, we know how that happens. We know what the process of purification is in.
Right.
And Protestants remain mute on the question. We know that someplace between death and heaven you're going to be purged of your sin, but we just know it's not purgatory. That's their take. Of course,
Right.
They're wrong about that, but that's their take.
Yeah.
Now, what you find in sacred Scripture, purification is always accompanied by some form of suffering, by some sort of willing embrace of this process of purification that's painful because it's a matter of becoming detached from our inordinate desires. And a great picture of this, I think, is the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6. When he sees God in his awesome holiness, Isaiah is undone. He says, oh, woe is me. He realizes how far he is from the glory of God. And so God, what does God do? He sends this angel with a burning coal that touches Isaiah on the lips and purges him, purifies him. That's a very powerful symbol of what happens in purgatory. St. Catherine of Genoa has a vision of purgatory. This isn't Catholic dogma, it's just a private revelation, but I think it's very instructive, in which she depicts purgatory as this encounter of the soul with the fire of divine love. You see God in his awesome holiness, and you go, poof!
Yeah.
And one interesting thing, the Church doesn't dogmatize about how long purgatory lasts. We don't really know.
No.
We don't really know. Does it literally last, 10,000 of our years, or is it in an instant that is experienced as an instant of this kind of painful confrontation with God's awesome holiness? We don't really know. We just know that it happens and that there is pain attached to it, because it's anytime you become detached from something that you're inordinately attached to, there's pain attached to that. All right, now, as far as the second part of the question, is it true that the separation of the soul from the body automatically frees us from the weakness of sin? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Okay, that would be the era of Manichaeism or Gnosticism, the belief that sinfulness, that we have sinful tendencies only because we're embodied. All right, but what we know about the angels proves that wrong. I mean, the angels that fell because of pride, not because of lust or concupiscence or gluttony. They fell because of purely spiritual sin, namely that of pride. All right, as far to the third part of your question, what are the effects of original sin? They are that one of the effects is a distinctly spiritual effect, that of ignorance, not knowing in what our true good consists. Mm-hmm. Another one is the sin of malice or egoism, all right, putting ourselves first. A third one is the sin of weakness, that we lack fortitude, we lack the ability to pursue the arduous good. And then only the fourth one is really connected immediately to the flesh, and that's the sin of concupiscence, or an inordinate attachment to sensible pleasures. So a lot of those effects of original sin have a distinctly sort of spiritual quality to them, and not directly attached to our embodiment.
There you go, Raymond. Glad that you're listening to us in Southern Africa. We also have another email from Raymond, and we'll probably get to that on a future program. When we come back, we'll talk with Robert in Georgia, Gary in Marrero, Louisiana, and hopefully you as well at 1-800-585-9396. 12 after the hour, this is Call to Communion on EWTN.
Sharing the fullness of the Catholic faith. 1-800-585-9396. Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This month, the EWTN home video highlight is Fields and Faith. Encounter athletes and sports figures of extraordinary skill and talent with Bob Dolan as they speak about their strong Catholic faith and the important role it plays in their lives. Get your DVD set through the EWTN Religious Catalog web store, EWTNRC.com, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or call 1-800-854-6316.
I kind of blamed the Catholic Church why I didn't get it before, but I was so wrong. I've come to realize that it was through the 12 years of Catholic education that I recognized God when He came into my life. And I want to really encourage EWTN, that you guys make a lot of sense.
EWTN's listener comment line. It's open now. Call 205-795-5773.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-800-585-9396.
Glad you could join us here on Call to Communion. If you have a question about the Catholic faith, today is the day to call in because, Rich, if I'm not mistaken, we are having a mailbag program tomorrow. Is that right? Oh, we are live. We are live tomorrow. Okay. My mistake. So call today, call tomorrow. 1-800-585-9396. Let's go to Robert in Georgia, listening on Sirius XM 130. Hello, Robert. What's your question today?
My question today is, how do you reconcile your support and faith in the Catholic Church when you disagree with the leaders and the Pope in their message at that time?
Okay. Really appreciate the question. So it depends a lot on the kind of things that you're disagreeing about. So let me give you an illustration. I might disagree with my pastor of my local parish about the prudential wisdom of hosting a potluck dinner on Thursday night, and the bishop at the same time is having a Eucharistic procession. All right, that just that's just a I don't think that was a decision made in poor judgment. Well, we all ought to go out and join the Eucharistic procession. That's just a hypothetical. I made that up off the top of my head. Those kinds of happen all the time. All the time. Okay, they're just managerial, procedural things. And of course, in a situation like that, I recognize that I'm not the pastor, I'm not the chief executive, I don't have that decision making, but in a respectful way, there's nothing wrong with me bringing my talents and interests to bear and sharing with my pastor or even my bishop and saying, I see this need over here, I don't think it's being met. Could I maybe step up to the plate and do something about it? And many times it's, when the laity they see needs on the ground, they're able to bring of the hierarchy, and this is how a lot of religious foundations and institutions have been founded, from the ground up.
Sure.
That's a perfectly appropriate way to bring our own charisms, our own talents to bear. It's an entirely different matter if you're talking about a dogma of the faith. So, for instance, if I, through my private study, came to the conclusion that some dogma of the Catholic faith, like the dogma of the Trinity, for instance, wasn't true, and I said, well, I just don't agree with the Catholic faith Trinity, well, then I'm committing the sin of heresy, okay? If I willingly reject the authority of the Church and deny something that the Church has said must be held de fide as a matter of divine and Catholic faith by everybody, then I've committed the sin of heresy. Most of the time, we have issues that fall someplace between those two poles. If the Church has proclaimed something as a dogmatic fact, you have to believe it. If it's just a matter of policy, there's a lot of room for discussion and the application of prudential wisdom.
Robert, is that helpful for you?
I'm asking more of a procedural. The example I would throw in my opinion, currently Pope Francis should be more on the front in the political circles protecting our marriage. I wouldn't say traditional marriage because there's only one man, woman. The other stuff is not marriage, as opposed to writing encyclicals about global warming, which I think would be more at this point appropriate. So it's more of a procedural political disagreement. I certainly don't question any kind of a dogma of the Catholic Church. That would be, not my role, or not even, as a faithful,
Sure.
Catholic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I understand that, and I appreciate it a lot. And I think it doesn't matter what your political persuasion or your theological persuasion, you're always going to find something to call into question when somebody else is in leadership other than you. All right. I mean, that's always going to be the case. I know. I mean, my first pope that I really remember vividly was John Paul II. I love him to death. He's a saint. Probably be a doctor of the church one day. I devour his writings and have great veneration for St. John Paul II. That doesn't mean that I sometimes don't scratch my head and go, why did he say it that way? Why did he do it that way? Why didn't he say this over here? And you can do that all. And that being said, I think it is to in charity, and we have an obligation, of course, in charity, to try to understand where the Holy Father is coming from at any given time, and say, well, why did he do it that way? That doesn't mean that in prudence, it was the best possible way to say something at the right possible time, but still go, well, why did he do it that way? And when I read the encyclical on the environment, for instance, I was kind of blown away because I realized, all right, what is kind of this keynote of Francis's papacy? It's to try to reach out to people who have written the church off as irrelevant. All right, they've written the church off, and to speak to those people in a way where they see that Catholic doctrine is deeply relevant to the most pertinent issues of their lives. Try to win them back, to win the faith a hearing in those circles. And you think about, as I'm completely behind the Church's teaching on marriage, 100%. And I want the Pope to defend it, of course. But there are a lot of audiences where, well, that message is going to fall on deaf ears. But when you've got an issue like the environment, and the Pope stands up, and there's all this media hoopla on the Pope's environmental encyclical, his environmental encyclical, you know how many people were interested in reading that would never have read, a statement, that maybe seemed to come out of another political box. And all of a sudden they're confronted with this rich tradition of Catholic social teaching because he's taken the issue and he's totally owned it, and he's interpreted it of the 2,000-year-old Catholic tradition on moral philosophy, moral theology, social teaching of the Church, the dignity of the human person, all these kinds of things. Now, all of a sudden, the conversation has been transformed, and what was a purely secular conversation has been thoroughly theologized. I think that's a brilliant apologetical move.
I know that you are a reader from way back. Have you read the whole thing?
Well,
I know that
I started at the top of it and finished at the bottom of it. I've scrutinized every single
Okay.
word of it, but I've followed the argument through.
People that I've spoken with who have read it, who are certainly smarter than me, have said it's not just about this one thing. It really encompasses quite a bit.
My friend Brian Cross, who I've mentioned on the show before, is a Catholic philosopher, said the environmental encyclical is to the question of the environment what Rerum Novarum was to the social issue of the 1890s. In the 1890s, if you were interested in the social question, all right, the question of labor, the popular perception was, well, you had to be a Marxist or a socialist or somebody on the political left. All right. What did Pope Leo XIII do? Well, he took that issue and he forever transformed the issue of labor and the social question and stuck it in a theological milieu and articulated the concerns of the labor movement, but in a way that was consonant with Catholic faith. And he really transformed the church and the world as a result and did a great good to the world. My buddy Brian said, this is what Pope Francis has done with the question of environmentalism. He's brought it back from the secular world. He's made it a theological issue and set it in the context of the Catholic social. Really a brilliant move.
Very good. Robert, thank you so much for your call. Our phone number, 1-800-585-9396. We have one line open, 1-800-585-9396. Go to Tom in Cleveland, listening on Sirius XM 130. Hello there, Tom. What's your question today?
Hey, if you wouldn't mind, I would just like to comment on those encyclicals in this way. I'm in sales, and generally, people don't change their mind about something unless they're offered new information about it, which leads them to reconsider.
Oh.
So, for what the Pope is doing, I applaud him.
Oh, very good.
I would like to ask you a couple really quick things about heaven. Number one being the time factor. I was always under the impression that heaven is timeless, it's eternal. So my question is, my father, who died 10 years ago, is he there waiting for me? I mean, it's just a little bit like, what's the sense of I'm here, he's there, and there's time in between? What is time like in heaven? I'll just get the other part out. Secondly, angels. If you could comment on angels, are they fully, I don't know what the word would be, but equal to us? Like, are they in the image and likeness of God? Where do they fall in the range? Like, where's the classification for angels, if you could help me with that?
Oh, great, wonderful questions. Well, you sound like a person who needs to spend a lot of time reading St. Thomas Aquinas. Right? Really, I think if you haven't dug into the works of St. Thomas, and particularly the Summa Theologica,
Sure.
All of these questions get dealt with really brilliantly in great depth. I think you'd really enjoy it. So dig into the Summa Theologica. It's available for free online of St. Thomas Aquinas, and you can read all about the angels, all about time and eternity, all about disembodied souls. All this kind of stuff gets developed a lot. A couple of things. Of course, we're dealing here with stuff that massively transcends the ability of our intellect to grasp. Kind of approach these things by analogy, but we can know a few things. Okay, so when we talk about the disembodied souls, well, if they don't have a material existence, all right. Well, their experience of time has to be different from ours, obviously, because our experience of time is very much connected to matter and space and change, all right? So they don't have exactly like ours. However, they do experience passing moments, all right, because they continue to have intellects that work discursively, and so they can actually mark progression through distinct acts of intellection, all right, so reason through a philosophical.
Intellection, another new word for me.
Okay, so if you think about following a geometric theorem,
yes,
there are distinct steps that you proceed through that you don't necessarily grasp the whole thing in one single intuition. Right? And the discursive intellect can continue to function. They also have non-discursive knowledge. They have immediate intuitive knowledge, but they still have intellectual knowledge, so they can experience a kind of time, kind of passage of from one state to another. Unlike God, who experiences no change at all, who knows everything by an immediate intuition and exists in a single moment of eternity. All right, so their existence is not like God, completely timeless, but it's not like ours either, wherein our experience of change is connected to matter and space. So it's kind of intermediate. All right, but we also know from sacred scripture that they're aware of of changing events on earth. They have a care for the souls on earth, and they do pray and intercede for the souls on earth. We read about that in Revelation chapter 5, for instance. All right. That's about as good as I can do on but they're not bored. That's one thing, so they're not sitting up there sort of drumming their fingers going, oh my gosh, we can't wait to get this thing over with. It doesn't work that way. Though they do want to be embodied. We know that as well. We know that at the resurrection of the dead, when they are returned to the physical bodies, that's a good to which they look forward. All right. With respect to the angels massively transcend us in intellect. They're much than we are, all right, much more intelligent. Angels also have need of grace, all right. The angels that did not fall were confirmed in sanctifying grace for all eternity. They need grace because as a created being, an angel doesn't have any right, any due in nature to know God in his essence. All right, just like we are creatures, they're also creatures. They're not due in nature to know God or see God immediately in his own essence. They also need sanctifying grace in order to do that. All right. However, they don't occupy the place in the hierarchy that we do. They're more powerful than we are now, but they are created to be our servants and God's servants. They're ministering spirits. That's what the scriptures say about them. And, of course, no angel ever enjoys the incredible dignity of the Son of God having become incarnate in the form of an angel, whereas he did become incarnate in human form.
Hope that's helpful for you, Tom. When we come back from our quick break, we'll talk with Grace in Kalamazoo. Also Rich in North Dakota, and we've got a line open for you at 1-800-585-9396. 1-800-585-9396. What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? This is Called to Communion.
Are people challenging your faith? Do you wish you knew how to explain it better? Well, then tune in to hear Father Mitch Pacwa and his guests, setting the record straight on all matters faith and reason. Next time on EWTN Live, only on EWTN.
Hear what others are saying about listening to EWTN Radio.
EWTN does a great job. I just want to say thank you, EWTN, because of the high quality and the variation of broadcasting. Bookmark, EWTN Live, the Daily Rosary, the Daily Mass. There's so much variation that I think that EWTN, as far as Christian broadcasting is concerned, it actually brings a very high level and high quality content that is very intellectual and that can reach a lot of people in a simple way.
Listen daily to EWTN Radio.
This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. 1-800-585-9396.
Hi, I'm Kathy Sinnott, and I'm host of EWTN's Celtic Connections. From our studios in Ireland, we take a Catholic look at the big stories breaking in Great Britain, in Ireland, and across Europe. Celtic Connections is the only Catholic news show made in the UK or Ireland. So join me every Saturday and Sunday on Celtic Connections.
For dates and times in your area, log on to EWTN.com.
This is Jerry Usher reminding you to listen to Vocation Boom Radio, Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Each week I bring you interviews with bishops, priests, vocation directors, even seminarians and those who support them, all in an effort to assist the Holy Spirit in what is truly a vocation boom around the world. That's Vocation Boom Radio, Saturdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, only on EWTN Radio.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-800-585-9396.
EWTN Radio, now heard on over 300 great radio stations across the U.S., including 1410 AM in Taylorville, Illinois, 102.9 Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and 88.5 FM in Marble Falls, Texas. Welcome to each and every one of you listening to us. Also, for those of you checking us out on YouTube, we do this every Monday through Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can check us out live, and then we also, encore it. We'll put it on the on-demand website there at EWTNradio.net. Let's go back to the phones here for Rich in North Dakota, listening to us today on Radio 1370 out of Grand Forks. Hello, Rich. What's your question today? Rich? Rich in North Dakota. Rich, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead, please.
I have a question. when did God create purgatory? Theoretically, it was not necessary until after Adam and Eve sinned.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for the question. I have to admit, this one I've never heard before.
Yeah.
All right. I know for a fact there's dogmatic teaching on the ceasing of purgatory to exist after the final judgment, of course, when all the souls have been admitted to heaven or hell. There will no longer be a purgatory. Specifically aware of a teaching that teaches dogmatic came into existence. My best inference would be with the death of the first soul who died in sanctifying grace, but without having done sufficient penance to enter directly into the presence of God. So we know it pre-exists the incarnation of the Son of God because we read about it in 2 Maccabees. So we know it's an Old Testament phenomena. So I assume, as you point out, with the death of the first soul who needed it.
So the answer would be a long time ago.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your call. Appreciate that. Our phone number, 1-800-585-9396. Do you have a question about the Catholic faith? Is there something about the faith that bothers you? Or maybe somebody told you something about the Catholic faith and you're thinking, is that true? I don't know if that's true or not. We can set the matter straight right here and right now. 1-800-585-9396. Let's go to Grace in Kalamazoo, listening on the EWTN app. Hello. Question today.
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Yes, why is it that a Catholic priest will not marry a non-Catholic to a Catholic?
Okay, thank you very much for the question, Grace. I appreciate it. Well, of course, I think the premise of the question is misguided. It is possible for, under certain circumstances, for a Catholic to marry a non-Catholic, and priests will officiate at those. Tom Price is in here pointing to himself, saying he once did that.
I was a non-Catholic at the 7 is when that was, and married my sweetheart, Adrienne, who was a Catholic, and it was a priest who married us.
Right, exactly. So that does happen. Now, there might be any number of reasons why in a specific instance a priest might not be able to officiate at a particular marriage ceremony. So, for instance, let's say a Catholic met someone who was a non-Catholic who had already been married and divorced to somebody else, all right? And then they approached the priest and said, would you marry us? Well, it's not the spouse's not being a Catholic that poses the problem in that instance. It would be the fact that the would-be spouse represents themselves as having already been married to somebody else.
Right.
All right. And so in that case, the ascertain with the judgment of the church, well, are you really still married to that person? I mean, just because a civil court gives you a divorce, that means nothing. I mean, civil court doesn't create marriage. Civil court can't destroy marriage. What God has joined cannot separate. All right. So if you say I married this other person in 1972, then the church says, oh, well, as far as we're concerned, you're still married. You can't get married while you're married to somebody else. So we have to find out if you really were married. That might be that's a deal breaker potentially. Yeah. So there are all kinds of reasons why a church might refuse to officiate at a wedding. And of course there are all kinds of rules in canon law about, the age of consent and soundness of mind and, all kinds of things that could potentially invalidate a wedding. But in general terms, a Catholic can marry a non-Catholic.
Yeah, there you go.
Lucky
Grace.
for Tom Price.
Amen, brother. I'm glad I'm a Catholic now.
That's right.
Grace, thank you so much for your call. 33 after the hour. This is Call to Communion on EWTN. We go now to Karen in Chicago, listening on Sirius XM 130. Hey, Karen, what's your question today?
Hi, I had a quick question about do not cast pearls before swine and how that applies to maybe someone who won't the church's teaching today, like specifically with the gay marriage thing.
Oh, yeah.
Does one have anything to do with the other?
Sure, that's a good question. I really appreciate that. Sometimes Scripture gives us a lot of sort of prudential advice, and it'll say one thing in one context and another thing in another context. So, the book of Proverbs is famous for that. There's a passage that says, answer a fool according to his folly. And then we read, don't answer a fool according to his folly.
Yeah.
You have to take the context into consideration. So we find, for instance, that sacred Scripture gives us a moral obligation to do what's called fraternal correction. In Matthew chapter 18, Christ tells us explicitly, if you find your brother in sin, you go rebuke him and you try to win him back. All right, and if he won't listen to you, you take it to the church, and there's a whole procedure for doing this. All right. So moral theologians looking at this have said, okay, so we got these, kind of two horns of the dilemma here. How do we work this out? And there are some principles that come out of Catholic moral theology, specifically with fraternal correction. When do you have an obligation to correct somebody? All right. So one of these things is ask yourself the question: are you the person who's best suited to make the correction? All right. So if I know something on my spouse, for instance, and something on me, we're obviously much better placed to do this than my next door neighbor. So I'm not going to go ask my neighbor to come,
Yeah.
do the job for me. All right?
Right.
And there are plenty of instances where, because of the nature of your personal relationship, you really haven't won the right to speak into somebody's life.
Mhm.
All right. So are you the person best placed to do this? Secondly, is the situation really objectively very grave? And the one you mentioned is, the question of the meaning of marriage is a very important thing.
Mhm.
So, if I were close to somebody and I saw that they were getting ready to get yoked in a relationship that was intrinsically immoral, that would be a situation where I might have that obligation.
Sure.
And then another qualification is, do I have a well-founded expectation that the person's going to listen to me?
Mm.
All right. And that one's harder to judge, obviously. That one's harder to judge. And sometimes it might mean, well, if I approach this thing in sensitivity and in love, with patience, over a long time, and I apply reason and charity, then I have a well-founded expectation this person might listen to me. But if I walk up to them with a catechism in one hand and the Bible in another and begin beating them about the head, the odds are they won't.
Right.
The prudential, and I've seen this in my own life. There have been people where I've beat them over the head with a catechism and they did me one better and beat me right back, And then there have been situations where I took the long view, I applied patience and reasonable questioning, and what about this and what about that? And over the course of several years, I actually saw people, change their point of view and come around and accept the church's teaching on issues.
And that can be very tough in this soundbite world, because these days people have the short attention span. We're just bam, 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 moving from one thing to another. So to take that long view is kind of tough.
It is, and I think that's where relationship becomes key. And even in our own lives, there's a huge difference between knowing that something is true,
Mm-hmm.
and then really knowing in an experiential way how to make that truth alive in my life. And that's where human relationships come in. It's one thing to know a dogmatic truth about the faith. It's another thing to see a person's life.
Yeah.
And you really have to have, if you have one and not the other, you really have a deficient understanding. And so that's why we have to do more than just beat them over the head with a catechism. We have to live the truth and make it known to them in an experiential way as well.
Sounds like a plan. Hey, Karen, thank you so much for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN, 38 minutes after the hour right now. Let's go to Stephen in Midland, Texas, listening also on Sirius XM 130. A lot of serious folks with us today. And, well, that's appropriate because these are serious questions. Ba-dum-ching.
I was waiting for the ring shot there.
I know. Stephen, what's your question today?
Last month was June, and everywhere on Catholic radio I was hearing that it was dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Yes.
I'm not Catholic, but I'm very, very drawn to the Catholic faith. I love the Catholic faith. And my question is, why do you have certain dedications, and some people say they dedicate themselves to certain aspects of Christ, the two that most common in the Sacred Heart? I think I've also heard the Holy Faith. If I get something wrong, please forgive me. Why do we have those as opposed to just worshiping Christ? Wouldn't worshiping Christ encompass them? Does that make sense?
Oh, it does.
And I
Played
have
so
another
very
quick
well.
question. I'm sorry. What is this month? And that's it.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the question, and I relate so deeply because I remember being a Protestant and regarding the Catholic faith and just finding this thing bizarre.
Mhm.
Like, they're devoted to the Sacred Heart, Mary's Immaculate Heart, and the Holy Infant of Prague, and I was just like, how many body parts are you going to create devotions to? It just struck me as weird, particularly when, as a Protestant, I was brought up to think it's all about Jesus, it's all about Jesus, it's all about Jesus, and in fact, the way that often get played out was in really kind of two aspects. One of them was that there was a kind of dogmatic and abstract truth about Christ, namely a certain understanding of the atonement of the death of Christ and what the death of Christ was meant to do in my life, bring about the forgiveness of sins and so forth. And so devotion to Christ as a Protestant for me meant giving assent to those doctrines, all right, about the nature of Christ's death and resurrection. And then also it meant, cultivating an interior life of prayer and conversation with Christ, what a Protestant might call a personal relationship with Jesus, all right? And those are good things, of course, all right? Then I came over as a Catholic and I realized, there are a lot of dogmatic truths about Christ that I affirm, all right, and that I can intellectualize. And I do need to know Christ interiorly in my prayer, develop that interior relationship with Christ. A lot of these sort of devotional aspects come out of a doctrine, namely the doctrine of the Incarnation, the realization that Christ took on a human body, lived a human life, and that his entire life, from conception to his resurrection, at every stage, was instrumental in bringing about the salvation of the human race. All right. So unlike Protestantism, which tends to lay really heavy emphasis on the issue of the cross in its theory of the atonement, and does, to a little extent, does kind of downplay aspects of his life. The Catholic view is that Christ went through and really recapitulated every aspect of human experience and infused it with the divine presence, and therefore elevated it and made it partake in the divine nature. And so, as a emotional living out of that truth, it's entirely appropriate to focus on some aspect of Christ's life or some symbol of his personality. The Sacred Heart, of course, is a devotion to the love of Christ, and to really work up in my imagination this impassioned love of this aspect of the mystery of Christ, because different people connect to different parts of Christ's life affectively. I was talking to a mutual friend of ours the other day who works in the police force on sex crimes, and was saying he deals with children that are victims of sexual abuse, and he tries to present Christ to them. Many times they have a very difficult time with the image of any adult man, and he presents to them the child Jesus, and they relate immediately. And I thought, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
It is.
All right. So it just brings out our appreciation of various aspects of the life of Christ, and I now have a deeper appreciation for it as a Catholic. And the second question was, is the month of July dedicated to any particular devotion? I'm real bad on calendar. How about you, Tom? Got any thoughts?
Pretty bad. I want to say precious blood, but that could be wrong.
All right. That's, had I been raised Catholic, I'd probably know that.
Yeah.
I have a buddy, my friend Mark Karam, the Maronite. He never misses a day. You
Isn't that
call
something?
him, what's the feast day today? And he'll tell you in two calendars. He can tell you the Roman Rite calendar and the Maronite calendar, and knows every day.
First of all, Stephen, thank you so much for your call. As you were laying all this out about why do people... why are they drawn to certain aspects of the life of Christ or the love of any of this? You could have a parallel conversation with the saints. Why am I attracted to the life of St. Thomas more than just about any other saint that I can think of, and I love them all?
Because you want to be a martyr?
Let's go to our next call. 1-800-585-9396. No, I mean, if you think about it, there's something about his life and his suffering and what he went through that resonate with somebody else. A housewife might say, "Oh, St. Margaret Clitheroe, that's my gal right there."
Sure.
And I could totally understand
that's
that too.
That's a good point.
Let's go to Jesse, who's driving through Missouri. And Jesse, what's your question today? Jesse in Missouri, are you there?
I am here. Thank you for your time.
Sure, go right ahead.
Real briefly, as an apologetic, how do you defend dogma, especially, to the point of heresy, when the church has reversed its positions in the past?
Okay, thanks. Well, I have no interest in. All right.
Me neither.
So if I didn't understand you correctly, pardon you. The question on the church reversing its decisions, the church has never reversed a dogma. All right. Now, what is true is the church has developed her understanding of dogmas and brought out new and interesting and relevant aspects of the faith. And this is the way knowledge expands in any realm. I mean, you think about Aristotle knew very well what water was. He knew a lot about water. He
Yeah.
could have written a great treatise on water. I don't think he ever did, but if he wanted to, he could have,
Yeah.
you know. And yet, there's no doubt that our understanding of what water is, you know, what atoms are, how they combine, and so forth, is so much deeper and richer. We know more about the essence of water now than we did in Aristotle's day.
Mhm.
But everything Aristotle would have said about it probably would have been true.
Yeah.
All right. And the same thing goes in theology, all right, and in dogma. We can know truths about the faith at one stage of the church's evolution and teach them as truth, and they're true. All right. The church is exposed to different historical pressures, different ethical questions get
Mhm.
raised that weren't anticipated, and you know, the bishops and the faithful and the Pope put their mind to the question and try to work out, you know, how we got guided by the Holy Spirit live this out in a modern context. New aspects of the faith come out, and sometimes that does result in changes of policy. You know, that's why canon law gets
Sure.
revised from time to time.
Yeah.
Right, may result in changes in policy. May also result in changes in the way we articulate the faith. All right, but not changes in the dogmas of the faith. They don't change. They can develop. We can develop our understanding of them.
Hmm. There you go, Jesse. Thank you so much for your call. 46 after the hour. This is Call to Communion on EWTN. We go now to Tony in Michigan. Hey there, Tony. What's your question today?
I have a question. I'm a celibate gay Catholic, and I when they light the lighthouse with the rainbow colors, but I look for the good that comes in everything from God, and I'm wondering, like, what good might come out of this? I mean, the only thing I can think of, and I don't know if you have any additional comment, would be that like a divorced married or a married homosexual couple would be subject now to the same divorce laws, alimony, child separation laws that a heterosexual couple would. And I think that may reduce the amount of lifestyle changes that a gay person would think of, and they may actually be discouraged from entering that. Can you think of anything else?
Well, I really appreciate the question, Tony, and thank you so much also for your vocation, for your chastity, for
Yeah.
your testimony, for your humility, for your prayer and sacrifice. It's a wonderful, wonderful witness, and we love you, and we thank you so much, and please pray for us. So you're asking about one of the great mysteries of the faith, which is how does God bring good out of man's evil choices? Now, sometimes we figure it out. Especially in hindsight,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, I know there are evil choices that I have made in my own life, and I've brought suffering on myself and people around me, and I wish I hadn't done those things. Looking at where I stand now, I see, well, you know, as a result of maybe not as a result of the sin, but as a result of the suffering, I now am a more empathetic person. You know, the people around me, maybe I have a deeper relationship with my spouse. I mean, you know, my spouse knows me at my worst. I know her at her worst. And, you know, having been through rough times together and lived through the experience of, you know, patient, humble forgiveness and acceptance, forgiveness and acceptance, forgiveness and acceptance, our relationship has matured and fermented, you know, to depths that we never would have had barring the suffering. I mean,
Sure.
God could have brought it about in another way, but so I can look at my own narrative and I can see those things. It's harder when you're talking about the scope of human history sometimes to say, well, what is the good that God out of this? There are some things that I would like to see, good things I'd like to see come out of it. One of them is I would like to see the church itself engage in a much broader as well as deeper and sustained reflection on the meaning of human sexuality and the meaning of marriage and on the relationship of the church in its witness to the broader culture, right? And I think that if it had that effect, well, you know, while the decision itself is going to hurt a lot of people,
No doubt.
many people, especially children, are going to be just devastatingly hurt. And it's going to be the church that has to come in and pick up the pieces, okay?
Yeah.
And so I'm not looking forward to that at all. But if it prompts Catholics to reflect more deeply and to bear a more fruitful witness in their own lives to the true beauty and dignity of human marriage and then Christian marriage in particular, that is a good that could come out of this.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was talking about that funeral that Dave Asheris and I attended earlier yesterday, and a number of us were talking about the Supreme Court decision, and one thing that came out of it was, you know, maybe this is going to be a good thing for the church because the church seems to do much better during adversity. And when we're all kind of, fat and happy, not so much. So maybe there's something to that.
There's something else also I'd like to bring out. I read through the decision on Friday pretty carefully, and I read through Kennedy's language. And, I can't boil 100 pages down to one sentence, but if I were going to do that, one thing that Justice Kennedy is very concerned with is he wants of persons. And he says, I want to treat homosexuals with dignity and fairness, and I don't want them to feel demeaned by being reduced to a, lesser status in the culture. And the church can go with him up to a certain point.
Right.
And I wrote an article on this for our local paper, and I drew out, yes, the church above all believes in the dignity of every human person, all right? But we need to have a conversation of what is it dignity consists in?
Mm-hmm.
Does our dignity consist precisely in whatever my sexual proclivities are, or does it exist in the fact that I'm a rational free being who's capable of attaining to the transcendent, all right? In light of that, how do I live out the rather arduous demands of my sexuality? That's a question about the nature of human dignity, and Kennedy put it on the table, and for that, I commend him.
Fascinating. Wow, food for thought there. Thank you so much for your call. Let's go to Ronald in Ohio, listening on AM 10. Hey, Ronald, what is your question today?
I was just calling about basically the same thing as the last question. Since there were 6 Supreme Court justices that are Catholic, how could it possibly get passed that same-sex marriage is okay?
Well, I think the answer to the question is that any Catholics that voted in favor of that decision probably have some pretty seriously deficient moral philosophy. So being Catholic doesn't mean that you have your head screwed on right. You can make some egregious moral reasoning, and the more you distance yourself from the authority of the church, the more you're alienated from that or ignorant of that, potentially the worse your reasoning is going to be. So unfortunately, Catholics are capable of making some pretty egregious.
In my own personal life, I try to think. I try to be what I would call, and maybe this is not a very accurate phrase. I try to be a Catholic in good standing. If nothing else, I want to try to go by what the church says, because the church is smarter than me.
The church, yeah, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
Let's go to a quick one here. Janice in Florida, listening on 100.5. Hey, Janice, what's your question today?
Yes, my question is, I'm from a little small town in Florida where I made my baptism, communion, confirmation, funerals, weddings, and everything. My older sister, still lives there.
Yes.
I attended a mass, and she's always telling me the latest there, but she's very disturbed.
We don't have much time, Janice. What is your question?
Okay, the question: persons fulfill their mass obligation by going to a church to where the bishop has removed the Catholic name off of the church. It was St. Margaret's Catholic Church. Now it's St. Margaret.
Okay, that depends. I'd have to have more information about why the thing was changed. I mean, there are certain ecclesial bodies out there that purport to be Catholic that are not actually Catholic. They're not in obedience to bishop. They're not in communion with Rome. And then the status of those is not all the same. It's not uniform. So some of them actually have validly ordained priests and valid masses. Some of them don't. So I'd really have to have a lot more information about your particular situation before I could answer.
Yeah, why don't you do this, Janice? If you could, please send us an email, and you can send that to ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com, and we'll take a look at that, and then maybe David could reply to you directly on that. How would that
sure,
be?
that'd be fine.
Very good. Janice, thank you so much for your call, and I want to thank everybody for their participation in a very special program for EWTN. We're all supposed to be called to communion, aren't we? And that's why we do specifically for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. We'll be doing it again at the same time tomorrow here on EWTN. David, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Looking forward to being with you again tomorrow at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern. We do it Monday through Friday. I want to thank Rich Jesse, our wonderful producer, Matt Kubinski, the phone screener par excellence, and all of you for joining us today here on Call to Communion. Have a great day. God bless.